started asking me, can I talk about the exploitation on Africa by China and Israel? Now, listen to me. I'm all about transparency and honesty. I'm not going to cap with any of you. The Western perspective, it appears that China is taking advantage and exploiting Africa. I do believe when it comes to the exploitation of African resources, China tends to take a little more than they actually give. At least that's what I thought, and it really depends on perspective. According to the millions of people in African countries that is conducting trade with China, 2/3 of the population agrees with China. They like China. It is generally positive. Many of them views Chinese influence as beneficial due to infrastructure and development, education and such. A massive investment for African countries. Thus, China does not interfere with their internal affairs unlike America does. Strength in relationship between African countries and China is rapidly growing on unimaginable rates. Recently, China has lowered their numbers for tariffs to 0 for African trades. However, despite economical growth, there is concern over sustainable debt, product quality, and labor practices. China doesn't aid on democracy and human rights, which is perfect for many African countries. So while the trade does seem valuable, it is lacking some perfections. But China has figured out a way to overcome that obstacle. Soft power and education. China has allowed other African students and people to work in China and to get an education there, to learn how to develop new technologies and infrastructure and take it back to Africa to use it for their benefit. All sounds peaches and cream, but debt traps are also a concern, including diplomacy, environmental issues, and the negative impact of cheap imports on local businesses. Some people from Uganda has experienced work relationships with Chinese people. Some say they are very kind and mannerful, others say they are very rude and racist. However, they also say that even despite them experiencing racism with Chinese people, they're not as racist as Arabs, which I find to be funny. What we need to understand is this: we are not in Africa, we are in America, with the western side of the planet. We don't know exactly what's going on in these countries, so many of us assume that China is taking advantage of Africa altogether. What I am learning from African people, African countries, and African leaderships is that they appreciate and respect China, because China is actually helping African countries to prosper and develop way more than the Western world would ever do. When it comes to these debt traps, and one of the reasons why is because some of these African leaders are borrowing way too much money from China, with most of them borrowing over 50% more than they should. And the repayment loans towards China is 25% greater. Kenya borrowed over 87%, Angola bought over 75%, and Ethiopia bought over 60%. Even though that the interest from China is unfair, African leaders don't know what the hell they're doing when it comes to borrowing money. So it puts a lot of stress on the citizens when it comes to paying off the debt. African leaders need to rely on more with their economic power rather than using China. Will definitely take a little bit longer, and that's okay. But if you completely rely on China, you would never be fully independent. That's all I have to say on the matter. This is Awnix, and I'm gone.